Hello, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. Before we get started, I've been asked a lot why I haven't accepted sponsors yet for the podcast. And the truth is, I'm just a little bit cautious and picky. Just like with galleries, it's important to find somebody that I am excited to work with. And I've finally found a company that I am really excited to partner with. So this episode is sponsored by Trakell Art Supplies. Trakell offers sensibly priced art materials conveniently shipped to your door. For over 30 years, Trakell has been obsessed with the art of brush making. They've been testing and tweaking their brushes to get the perfect balance, flow, and snap. So go to Trakell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off of your next order. My guest this week is Chris Leib. Chris's artistic journey began by way of anthropology and a near miss with a career in real estate. An apprenticeship with Roberto Lupetti provided a foundation from which his talent could organically grow. Chris talks about overcoming setbacks, including an explosion that forced him to move his home and studio. It's an amazing story that left me a little speechless. He also talks about life with a fellow artist as a spouse and the habits and mindsets that contribute to his creativity. Chris is a painter with a wonderful sense of humor and a healthy dose of curiosity. He's a realist painter with a twist. He paints bonobos and astronauts in pretty hilarious yet humbling scenes. You know, whenever I start to lose perspective, I have to remind myself that we are just silly little monkeys clinging to a rock spinning around in outer space. And Chris's work, for me at least, is a good reminder of that. So without further ado, here is Chris Leib. So, Chris, thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you started off as an artist? Like when you sort of realized this is a thing that I'm going to do?
Yeah, I every few years I kind of question myself if I should keep doing this. But in my case, I was sort of an amateur who kind of got thrown into professional commercial market. I was studying anthropology at Berkeley, and I wanted to go on and become a professor. And pretty much in my last year of college, I became very jaded with academia, became very bored. I started to bring sketchbooks to class and, started doodling and drawing people in the class and comic book type stuff, fantasy art, that kind of thing. And, then I graduated, and it was the middle of the recession. I didn't know what to do. I was thinking about applying to law school. I got a job moving furniture. And so this was the early 90s, and a friend of mine brought me this ad from the architecture department that somebody put up and said, "Show me your doodles and sketches. We're starting a business." And I thought, well, that's not very intimidating. So I called the number. This was before, the internet. And so I met with these guys at a cafe, and I basically showed them my notebooks from class. And, they looked it over. They kept a couple sketches, and I didn't hear anything. And I was moving furniture and for a living. And about 4 months later, before work, one morning, these guys show up on my doorstep, and they offered me a job illustrating fantasy artwork for their company.
Wow.
And I thought, yeah, I was like,
as you were describing that, I was really curious. I'm like, who wants everybody's doodles? This is interesting.
Yeah. Who are these guys? So, yeah, I didn't believe it really at first, because I'm like, what are you talking about? I've really very little, a couple art classes under my belt, and so, I was a little bit hesitant, and they told me the pay, and it was probably twice what I was making at this other job. So I said, sure. Mm-hmm. And
I don't have to move furniture.
And I don't have to, yeah. Well, it's funny because that was like a government job. So basically you moved furniture once a week, like a desk. Yeah. So they had an office in San Francisco. And so I remember the first day, because I went there and they told me where it was, in this little street. And the little street turned out to be this really seedy looking alley. And there was a massage parlor at the beginning of the alley. And so you had to walk down the end of the alley, and there was this old decrepit hotel. And so up on the third floor was their office. And I was working with these four other illustrators, and they had all gone to the Academy of Art in San Francisco, and they had portfolios and, 4 years of schooling. And, I came in, I didn't know what I was doing at all. And I could draw with pen and ink, and, I could kind of draw out of my head. So I did this fantasy stuff for them. But one of the guys I worked with, he went on to do covers for the New Yorker. And at the time, he was doing ad agency jobs on the side. And I remember he had a job. It was like maybe 2 months of work, and he made $20,000. And I thought, this is a great business, so I'm gonna get training in this. But that company went under, and before I got any training, and so I was taking kind of jobs here and there, and trying to save money. I actually lived out of my car for a little while to save money for art school.
Oh, really?
It's really crazy times, but
that's pretty hardcore, though, Chris.
Yeah, well, I was dedicated.
Yeah.
So I eventually saved up enough money and moved to San Francisco, and started taking classes kind of piecemeal at the academy. I could take a portrait drawing class, and I figured I needed to learn the portrait. I could draw the figure. I knew anatomy from anthropology, but I figured if I couldn't draw the face, what good would it do? So I was taking some painting classes also. And then my dad saw all this going on, and he really wanted me to go into real estate or something like that. And he sort of gave me an ultimatum in a way. It was like, he said, he knew a guy that he met at the gym who was an older guy who was a painter from Italy. He was a portrait painter, still life painter, classically trained before World War II. And he took on apprentices. And so my father said, well, look, why don't I try and set up an appointment with him, and you can go, show him your stuff. And, if he takes you in, he'll take you on as apprentice, and great, you get free training, you get really good training, and, really commit yourself to this. And he said, but if he doesn't, then let's just agree to call this a day. And, you go, it's a hobby, you'll go into real estate or something else, go to law school, whatever. And
wow, wait. Okay, so everything is riding on this guy that your dad met at the gym.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, yeah. No, it was funny because it was, I don't know if I think in the back of my mind, I was thinking, I'm going to go back to the academy if this doesn't work out. But,
right.
Screw that. I'm going.
We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But right now I'm going to pacify Dad.
Make Dad happy. So I went down to see him. He had this beautiful studio with, these portrait paintings, and, he had a couple other apprentices in there doing stuff in the back room. And I sat down with him, and I brought maybe 20 drawings I had done in this portrait class. And he opened up my portfolio, and he went through like maybe 4 or 5. And then he just looked at me and said, welcome aboard. And I thought, yeah, great. Okay. And I find out later my father had talked to him and was, telling him, like, you'd be really tough on him. Don't, cut any corners, all this stuff. So I studied with him for about a year and a half. And about halfway through that, I actually started the paintings I was doing with him. I started showing them in galleries and selling them. So that was kind of when I felt like, okay, I've kind of got at least the rudiments of this down, and I'm, was definitely on my way to make this a profession. So.
Wow. So I'm curious, what was his name?
Roberto Lupetti. In
that year and a half that you were studying with him, was there anything that you learned with him that you felt like, wow, that was, I would not learn that at the academy, for example?
Well, the academy at that time their fine art department was teaching more like impressionist sort of painting techniques, and Roberto was very classical, traditional. So, we spent 6 months drawing on tone paper, proportion drawing, very, very accurate. It wasn't site size, but it was proportional measuring, so forth. And then, the rest of the training was grisaille and layer painting and glazing, and so it was, very detailed work.
Yeah.
And they didn't teach that at the academy, as far as I knew, anyway.
We have such a wide range of people who listen to this show. Sure. And I don't think I've ever asked anyone to describe this, but will you describe grisaille for people who don't know?
Oh, okay, sure. Basically, it's a gray painting. So it's painting. Once let's say you're painting a still life, you'll proportion the object and transfer it to the canvas. And then you lay in all the values. So it's just the value painting, usually done in there's different ways to do it, but in a black and white or maybe an umber.
Burnt umber. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And that lays in the foundation for the painting, and then you can build on top of that with color.
And you're glazing over that. And so it's very much...
It gives you a really strong foundation for the next layers. So everything's kind of done in stages in this sort of painting.
Yeah, so that's very different from the plein air-ish. Well, I shouldn't say plain, but alla prima painting that you would have gotten that sounds like they were doing at the Academy at that time, which is knock it in, finish it in one sitting almost.
In an hour and a half or something, so... Yeah, no, we would spend, I think the first painting I spent about a month and a half, and and it was always about a month probably, or at least 3 weeks probably per painting with Roberto. I actually, after that training, I kind of felt like, I had a system that I could rely on. Like I knew okay, you can do this and then these next steps and you'll end up with this painting that looks like something real. Mm-hmm. But after I left, I didn't feel like I could really paint, like I could just take a bunch of paint and make something with confidence. I knew I could kind of do it. But so I actually went back to the Academy for a couple more classes after that to do some clothed figure painting and that kind of thing, just to learn their style as well. So my style now is kind of like a Jeet Kune Do of, a mixture of all kinds of styles, So.
Yeah, which I think is kind of what happens. I mean, especially, gosh, when you think about it now, just the fact that there is so much art history behind us that we can pull from and pull all those techniques and all those
and there's
ways.
YouTube.
Yes. Yeah. There's the thousands and thousands and thousands of YouTube tutorials available to us now.
Yes.
Which is, it's amazing though, because you can literally go and say I want to learn about XYZ and you're going to find it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You can find whatever you want out there really. Which actually, it's funny because I taught private students for a long time. And, I think now with all these YouTube videos, you find less and less people wanting to take private lessons. They might want the degree, but they're not necessarily going to apprenticeship programs that I did and so forth.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. That seems so, well, I get it, but at the same time.
I don't know that statistically, but
it just feels that way.
I feel as that, yeah.
Yeah. I would just say that there's something to be said about spending a year and a half like you did as an apprentice with an artist and learning directly from them and having that one-on-one and being able to say, not have to dig through a million bad tutorials to find a good one.
Right. No, absolutely. You definitely learn a lot more and a lot faster. And it also, because of that atmosphere, being in a studio, an atelier or something, there's other people around. You're kind of forced to become dedicated in a way, right? You don't want to show up and just be a slacker, right? So it pushes you, I think. I'm
curious also, I feel like I can see it, so I might be asking a question that maybe I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to say I probably don't. How does your background in anthropology connect with your current work?
Well, I ended up in physical anthropology. I started in cultural anthropology and ended up in physical anthropology pretty quickly, which is, I think they call it stones and bones, so. It's
the hands-on aspect of anthropology.
Yeah, and it's the evolution of the species and, looking at the bone records and the bones and the archaeological records and so forth, the morphology of the primates and that kind of thing. So, that's been an interest, and obviously it's, I paint chimps, bonobos. So it's definitely shown up in my work. It's actually kind of funny because I started out, after I left Roberto, I kind of started to do this really dark work. And then I kind of ended up, I was still selling still lifes. And I kind of ended up, I think kind of after 9/11, people, at least the galleries I was working with, they wanted something really safe. It was after the .com crash as well. So I was doing more still lifes and portraits. And I remember several still lifes back then that the composition wasn't quite working. There was something wrong. And even then I thought I'm going to throw a chimp in here coming out of the corner or something like that. And totally brought the painting together. So it was always kind of in the background. And then, eventually it became pretty much the kind of dominant character in my work, I guess. So.
And what is it about the chimps that fascinate you? Well,
I think in the way I was using them, they kind of represent the one end of our evolutionary spectrum. And the astronauts, I paint, for people in your audience who don't know, I paint chimps with baby astronauts. So So, the astronauts are kind of the other end of the spectrum, the triumphant achievements of humankind, right?
And are you a Stanley Kubrick fan?
I like Stanley Kubrick, yeah. I don't know if I'm quite a scholar of his work, but I like it. So when I started this whole series, it actually started with just the astronauts, and it was a series I was calling Sabotaging Eden. And basically these astronauts who, they're Western heroes, and they were basically, it was kind of a crazy idea. It was like they're returning to this kind of mythical beginning of Western civilization, the Eden. So it's kind of going back into a mythical history.
Right.
And they're going there to kind of be agents provocateur, to sabotage it, to create the fall. And so tempting Eve with the apple and whatnot. So that was the initial idea. And then it kind of went from there to different kind of key frames in Western history, in quotes, in the mythological history, right? So I had the mimicking poses from Saint Sebastian or Cain and Abel. I had a couple astronauts fighting over pizza in that case, something trivial. And at one point I thought, maybe I'll do a PA thought piece, and I thought, maybe I'll have an astronaut holding a chimp, kind of a little bit of a Kubrick homage or something, but and then I thought, well, maybe the chimp is holding the astronaut. And then I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do a Madonna child piece. And so the next thing I know, there's bonobos, holding this little baby astronaut. And I'm like, but when I painted it, I thought, this is kind of there's a lot of levels to that image. You know? So I started painting more and more of those. And that's kind of how it started. They kind of represent sort of, the rational and irrational, maybe a primitive civilized, Apollonian, Bacchanalian, that kind of thing, but kind of in reverse roles, because the bonobos are always kind of wise and protective, and the astronauts are literally infantile and mischievous.
What memorable responses have you had to your work?
I've had two very memorable responses, and they were both from my father. The first one was when I was a student studying with Roberto. I had finished my first painting that had actually gotten to a gallery, and it was in a miniature show, and it had sold like literally the first night of the miniature show, like within an hour. It was just, I was, really happy about that. And then I went into the studio and I was working on the next painting after that. And I, thought, okay, well, I want to experiment a little, I've learned this process. I want to try maybe a new way of laying in the paint and some new colors and new mediums and so forth, because I was still studying, right? So I worked on a painting for a couple of days and was starting to lay stuff in, and it was just a total failure. and my father, being a friend of Roberto's, would occasionally stop by his studio. So he, it was a time when I wasn't there in the studio, and he had stopped by, and so I ran into my father later, and he was saying, oh, I stopped by Roberto's studio today. I was like, okay. And he said, yeah, and I saw your painting. And I was just thinking like, okay, here it comes, And he just looked at me. He was really angry, and he kind of flipped up his hand, and he gave me the raspberry, I was like, holy crap. And then he just walked off, and I was like, wow. It's quite an opinion,
Wow, thanks, Dad.
Yeah. So I should say, my father was an art teacher. He was an artist and a very good one.
Okay.
So, this was kind of a heavy, opinion, critique, I guess, for me, not to mention he was my father. So,
well, yeah, and he already told Roberto not to, coddle you. So,
right. So we didn't talk for weeks. I remember we had this big fight at the, and everything, anything from the past came out in that fight, but it all got solved, and we actually had a good relationship after that. But that was the first strong opinion. And then the second time was also from him, and it wasn't too long ago actually. And it was really nice. He saw a painting I was working on for a show, and he, just said like he was really proud of me, and that I had, even though things were, kind of a financially difficult at times and stuff, I stuck with it, and he really liked my work and thought I, was good at what I did and dedicated. And so, it really meant a lot.
Yeah.
He didn't give a compliments too often. So
right.
Yeah.
And especially, I mean, it sounds like, so earlier on when he was wanting you to go into real estate or whatever, so I didn't realize he
I
was
would have
an
been a
art.
great realtor. I know it.
And you would have been so fulfilled, I can tell.
Yes.
Like, this is a great house, except did you see back there where it's got like this big pile of dirt? Let's go dig through that.
Yeah, right. You need a mural in here. You really do.
Yeah, exactly. You need some bonobos.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that's just an amazing compliment, because it sounds like he was, maybe in some ways trying to protect you from, that concept of the artist's life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he kind of knew in the early 60s, he had started like a small greeting card business. He did cartooning back then. He actually had a pretty broad range. He could do cartooning to very realistic pen and ink work. And really detailed stuff, a lot of cross-hatching, stippling, and you take razors and cut back into it. And they were really large drawings, animals, landscapes, that sort of thing. And so he knew how tough a business it was, and he had actually did a comic strip. I think it was somewhere in the mid or late '60s, and it came really close to getting syndicated. It went to the San Francisco Chronicle. And it came down to him and another guy, and they kept it for some months. And Herb Cain, who was the opinion guy. I can't think of the word.
Like the editorial?
The editorial thing. Yeah. Herb Cain was kind of their main editorial guy. And it came down to his opinion about which cartoonist would get the syndication. And he picked the other guy, and I can't remember who it was, but it was I want to say it was like Beetle Bailey or something. It was something. It was a big name, and so I don't know why he didn't pursue it after that. I suspect maybe, I was in the picture at that point. He decided to, keep a steady job or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. He always told me, if you're going to go this route, you better have thick skin.
Yeah. Wow. So great compliment.
Yeah.
Can you share a story of a time in your journey when you encountered a setback or experienced a particular challenge, but most importantly, what did you take away from that experience?
Where to start? How many days do we have this? Yeah. I think pretty much anybody who goes into this field is going to have all kinds of setbacks. And there's just so many failures and setbacks. It's from rejections from galleries to just all kinds of stuff that happens along the way. It's just such a tough field.
And that's kind of why, sorry to interrupt you, but sure. That's kind of why I asked the question, because I think it's so helpful for other artists to hear both that, oh my God, Chris went through that too. Okay. So it's not just me, or.
Well, I got some doozies that I'm sure that people have.
Yeah. I think it's just like, especially nowadays, it's so easy to, kind of paint the Facebook profile version of your life, which is all the highlights and all the great stuff. But I think seeing, the struggle and the resolution is that, I think that's where the real growth is. Like, that's when, you really come to maturity as a painter.
Right. Well, yeah, it's, like I said, I've had a lot of setbacks, and, there's always that period of time where you're kind of bummed out for a while, but then at least for me, it's always been, I really want to do this. So I just keep pushing forward with it. Probably the really big setback I had, which was very early on, it affected my art, but it wasn't exactly art related, but it really meant that I had to really commit to the field to get past it. And it was after my apprenticeship with Roberto, and I moved back to San Francisco. So I had my studio there. I had the whole kind of front of the flat to work in, and I was illustrating at that time for McGraw-Hill and painting in the living room. And this was back in '98, so it was kind of the height of the .com boom, and so we had good rent. We were a rent controlled apartment, and anyways, just to kind of set it up, this happened. I remember it was a Friday, and it was close to 5 p.m., so it was rush hour traffic. And this was on 19th Avenue in San Francisco. And 19th Avenue feeds into 280, which, goes all the way down the peninsula to San Jose. So it's a major traffic route. 5 p.m. on a Friday, it's packed, right? And I remember that weekend because it was the last weekend they were going to show the old Star Treks on TV. So I had this stack of VHS tapes. And so now I'm dating myself here, but it's like I was going to record them all and like paint all weekend. I was looking forward to it. So at 5 minutes to 5, there's this like boom, this huge explosion sound, and the whole house just rocks, and it's just a big shockwave, goes through it.
Wow.
And at first I'm thinking like earthquake, and I didn't know what to make of it. And my housemate had gone downstairs, and he was going into the garage to leave. He was moving his car out of the garage, and I thought, oh my God, he backed out, and maybe a truck hit him and it exploded. I didn't know what happened.
Yeah.
So I go running up to the window, and I look down, and there's no accident. And then out of the corner of my eye, I see this garage door from like 2 doors down, and it's like 30 feet in the air, okay, crossing 6 lanes of traffic, and it lands on the other side.
Oh my God.
Like, what the hell? So I go running downstairs. I mean, I don't even have shoes on at this point. I'm like running out into the street, and I see my housemate, and he's like, yeah, I think there's a fire. Something happened. I don't know. And the house next door to us, which still had its garage door, there were several people, and they were trying to lift the garage door, and we didn't know what was going on. And so we were dog sitting that weekend, so we thought we better get the dog, right? So we go back in, and I go into my room, and my room had a window which was off the alleyway between the 2 buildings. And I'm starting to put my shoes on, and all of a sudden, like, this smoke just starts coming through the window. And I start hearing people yelling, like, help me, And I can't even remember how to tie my shoes. I'm just like,
right, like the adrenaline must be like through the roof.
Yeah. So I get the shoes on. We go back downstairs, and this woman who lived next door on the bottom flat came up to me, and she recognized me, and she said that she couldn't find her housemate, and could I help her find her? So we cut through our garage, and we go into the alleyway, and at this point, there's even more people trying to get through this garage door next door. And from the alleyway, I could look back, and I could see into that garage. And I look in there, and there's this guy. Basically, he's sitting there in his underwear. His clothes had been blown off, and he's white as a sheet. I mean, he's just, bright white. His skin was bright white, except around his hands and his ankles. And I'm looking at him, and I realize, like, he's Asian, and his hair was like straight up, like light gray and kind of singed into curls, and there's all this steam coming off it. And he's just kind of looking around like, what the hell happened? Where am I? And so the story was that this guy had, from an early age, I guess, been making illegal fireworks for the Chinese gangs. And he had his whole garage full of gunpowder.
Oh my God.
So the last thing his wife heard was that he was going to go downstairs and have a smoke.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So a few minutes later, right, the whole building above him, like 2 stories above him, basically went up in the air 20 feet and came down at a 45-degree angle, up like a rocket,
The whole building?
The whole building.
Wow. So it came off its foundation and shot up?
Yeah. So it was a big building. It was 2 flats above, it was. And it literally came down like at a 45-degree angle. So this building's kind of angled between 2 other buildings on either side. And
holy crap.
And this guy got blown through the wall of his garage into this other garage. So through 2 walls, lath and plaster walls, right? He, like his skin, top layer of his skin was singed off. He had spinal injuries, head injuries, splinters, He ended up making a complete recovery, apparently.
Wow.
But the police report, I remember, said that only 10% of the gunpowder had blown up and the rest burned off. And they said if it had all blown up, like the whole block would have been destroyed, So we were pretty lucky.
Wow.
But at one point the police showed up and kind of shooed everybody away. And so we stood across the street and we watched basically like 5 houses. Our house didn't completely burn, but 5 buildings burned. And then ours, the roof burned, and they came in, they broke through our walls to fight the fire. And actually all the flames came through my window. And funny enough, like 2 days before, I had taken my portfolio and all my artwork, which used to be stored next to that window, and moved it across the hallway. So,
wow. So your artwork was saved.
My artwork was saved, yeah. But the guy next door was an artist, and he lost everything, so.
This episode is sponsored by Trakell Art Supplies. Over the next few weeks, Trakell is sponsoring this podcast, and we're going to bring you some quick tips and techniques that will help you in your studio. Each episode will have a quick 1-minute nugget for you. So if you've never heard of Trakell Art Supplies, I'm happy to introduce them to you. Brian Trakell started making brushes after a backpacking trip through Japan. He got to see firsthand how the right materials and attention to craftsmanship turns a basic tool into an indispensable part of your studio life. He became obsessed with making brushes, and he even went to Germany to fine-tune those skills. So in coming episodes, you will get to hear directly from him what drives this obsession, what makes a good brush, and how you can get the most out of your tools. I will be playing around with their products and sharing what I think with you. Plus, we'll have a few Trakell Pro users give their best tips as well. So this, I think, is going to be really fun and informative for you. If you want to check them out yourself, go to Trakell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off of your next order. Okay, now back to Chris.
That was 1998, so the dot-com boom was in full swing, and I didn't have a place to work or stay. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I ended up house sitting, and then a friend got me into some studios down in the Mission District. And I actually took over a studio of a guy named John Copeland, who had moved to New York, a really good artist. And although I didn't know it at the time, I found a couple of his paintings in the studio that he had left and painted over him. I wish I hadn't. But so some collector out there has a John Copeland underneath mine. But anyway, I didn't have a place to live, though. And so a friend of mine, his sister had a place for rent. And I talked to her, and she said, yeah, I got this place for rent. It's $300. And I thought, wow, that's great. Okay, I'll take it. And
$300 in San Francisco, even in 98, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. So I said, well, I'm not going to get a better deal than that. And I know this person. So, okay, yeah, I'll take the room. And she says, well, you really want to see it first. And so I go over there, and it's basically it was a 5-by-7 foot hall closet.
I was just going to say, was her walk-in closet?
Yeah, basically. And I'm like, I'll take it, So, I had to keep the door a crack, to sleep there. But, it was the only way I could afford the studio and a place to live and still keep illustrating and painting, So I did that for like a year, I think. But I basically figured I'm going to be in the studio. I had a good studio, so I'm going to be in the studio most of the time anyway.
Yeah. You just need a place to sleep. And I'm sure after sleeping in your car, it felt like you had tons of room.
Yeah, right. It's a luxury apartment.
Don't worry, I've slept in my car too, don't worry.
Well, the thing about this, it was up in Laurel Heights, so it had a great zip code, So
there you go.
Where do you live? I live in Laurel Heights, yes.
Under the stairs. Oh, I mean in the walk-in closet.
I mean, it was actually good. It actually forced me it forced me out of, just sitting in my living room painting by myself, for the next 20 years, right?
True.
So I was, kind of forced into the artist community in the Mission District, which ended up being great. I was in that area for about 12 or more years, and I got very involved there with things. And, and it also made it so I was always in the studio. And I remember at that time I had read somewhere that John Singer Sargent painted like 11 hours a day, and I thought, well, now I can outdo that, so be here 15 hours.
Wow. So before you're like, I don't know, I'm just going to paint you as the Trekkie nerd in your studio by yourself.
Yeah, right.
And now you're in the Mission District with all these other artists. I'm just curious, because I know that having a community of artists around you to bounce ideas off of, and to even just, kind of just the fact that somebody else is there working at the same time you are, even if you're not actually talking to each other, right, somehow is reassuring and motivating. Yeah. But can you talk a little bit about that community of artists and what that did for you?
I mean, it did expose me to other ideas. So I never got an MFA, and I didn't really go to a full-time art program. So a lot of the ideas that, were coming out of those schools from Art Institute or CCA or CCAC back then, you met people that had come out of those programs. And so, those ideas were getting bounced around. People that I knew could come in and give me feedback on my work, which I didn't really have painting out of my living room. And then, there was always the exposure to, maybe a group show here and there. Some opinions maybe I weren't always valued as much as others, but it was still good to get the feedback. And then they did open studios there. And so that was kind of nice too, to have the public come in and see the work. Cause I think at that point I really wasn't showing much. I was showing a little bit in a gallery in Santa Fe, but nothing in the area at that time. Mm-hmm. And San Francisco, the art studios in San Francisco at that time, you had a lot of people didn't show up. I mean, there were a lot of people that maybe came just on the weekend, and some people I never met until, they moved out. But there were a fair number of people who were there regularly as well. So it was, there was a certain reassurance just knowing there's other artists around and you can go talk to them and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this piece. I don't know why. Is it the composition? Is it the, what? And just get some fresh eyes on things. Yeah.
How do you get that now, or do you?
Well, my wife is an artist, Christina Reiner Hansen, and a very good artist. And she and I will often look at each other's work, to get feedback. I mean, I really trust her opinion on my work, probably more than anybody. I mean, you can occasionally get feedback from social media, but you don't know. Everybody is so positive there that you don't know.
Yeah, great, good job.
Right.
Pat you on the head.
Yeah. Big smiley face, thumbs up. And then I have some other artist friends who, occasionally I'll send something to, but I mean, at this point, I kind of feel like I last number of years, I mean, I feel like I kind of know what I'm doing. I don't have to ask for that opinion and fresh eyes as much.
Right.
I kind of very focused on what I want out of painting.
When you're at that stage, though, because clearly your technical ability is outstanding, and clearly you have a vision for your work. It's not like you're lost in any of those areas. But this might be a weird question. I don't know. But when you're at your stage,
hey, I paint bonobos and baby astronauts. Go ahead.
But when you do feel like you need an outside opinion, like, I don't even know if it's an opinion, but when you do feel like you need a conversation with another artist, what would you say it typically is? Like, so, like, I don't think you're going and saying like, oh God, like, how can I get the hair on this? Like a little bit,
Yeah. What brushes are you guys using?
Right. What lights in your studio?
Trying to think back to a conversation I might have had more recently. I think most of the conversation, again, probably more with my wife, the conversations about a particular painting, typically revolving around more with the composition, maybe like, why is this, do you think if I add some more dark over here, do you think that would adjust it? Right. Like I have some friends who, they're not necessarily showing in galleries professionally. They're good artists, and one of them's like a really good illustrator. And we'll always get in conversations about work, and we typically talk more about his work and why something is or isn't working, or kind of sometimes the bigger pictures of like issues, like how do you get motivated? How do you find that thing you do? How do you get there to find what your subject matter is, or how you do it?
So much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's like the technical side of it, right? Where you're like, how am I going to paint, and how am I going to develop my style or my way of doing something? That you can't really tell someone to do. You can kind of give them certain directions, by looking at what they do, where they've kind of been before, and maybe try and lead them in a certain way.
Off the top of my head, I'm just thinking of Peggy Kroll Roberts and Ray Roberts are two painters that are married to each other. And I know there's others that I've interviewed. Rick Stevens is another one. His wife is also an artist. So I'm kind of curious about that, since my husband's not an artist. What's it like having another artist as your spouse? Like, how do you guys support each other? What's it like being married to another artist? Can you answer that question without getting yourself in trouble?
Right. Yeah, it's actually great because we have we can keep the same schedules. We understand each other's schedules. Like if we're in the middle of something, we can work all night if we need to, and skip dinner, and and everybody understands that because that we both know the profession, and we both know like we have commitments, and sometimes we're going to be just burdened with deadlines, or sometimes you kind of have that creative spark and you want to just keep going. And I think it's difficult if you're with someone who has, say, a 9-to-5 job and you're an artist or in a field where you have to be, if you will, on call or,
Right. Where you might still be working at 11 o'clock at night sometimes.
Yeah. Or 2 a.m.
Right.
So, it's if they have a particular schedule, then, it becomes very hard to have a relationship, I think. But, in our case, it's great. We can always bounce ideas off each other. We both understand, what we're working on. It's not like, how was your day at the office? And I have no clue about, what it's like to be an accountant. So I can't really, right. I'm tuning out now, it's like we're both interested in what we're doing and what each other is doing. So, it's actually really great. And I she's such a good artist that I when she has an opinion on my work, I really take note of it, which is, invaluable, really. So,
does it ever get scary that that your livelihood is 100% dependent on the art market?
Yeah, that can be a little difficult. I mean, from very early on, I knew there'd be good times and bad times. I didn't see this like, oh, I'm just going to like sell show after show and cash, be
on the cover of all the magazines.
Right. Yeah. So, I always, when the money comes in, I save a lot of it. And then, when the bad times are there, you can dip into that and so on. So
buffer. Yeah.
I've been pretty careful that way. And, I don't overextend. I don't get the biggest studio and, the best brushes.
This is the stuff that's awesome because the whole sort of like behind the scenes of how you manage things, because it's not a 9-to-5 job. So you're not getting the paycheck every 2 weeks. Often you're getting like a chunk of money and then nothing for like a long period of time until you have another show or you build stuff up or right. Whatever. So if it's not too personal of a question, how do you manage that?
Well, so okay, just to be very frank, I mean, before the crash, things were going really well. For a number of years, I was just living off selling artwork. And after the crash, the market started to dry up and then it kind of dried up and, it's kind of bounding back now. But for those years, I also was doing some private teaching. And so I started to kind of ramp up that business. And that took maybe a couple of years, but it started to go really well to the point where, I could work a couple of days a week and have at least a base income. And I had actually a waiting list of students as long as I probably had 10 or 12 private students. I had a waiting list about that long, and I had people who wanted me to start doing small group classes. And I was thinking actually of expanding to do an atelier at that time. But yeah, that was, that was a really nice base income. And then the rest of the week I could work on painting and I didn't have to rely necessarily on just sales. When we moved to New York, I did a little bit of teaching there, but it was a different kind of demography, and it was a little bit harder to find students, private students. Most people were there. There's a lot of very affordable art classes if you just want to take an art class, but also people are, there's sort of a more of a, what should I say? I don't know if it's ambitious is the right word, but people will go and get the degree, and there's a lot of art schools there. So it wasn't, there weren't necessarily a lot of people taking private lessons, but there was a lot of jobs as artist assistants. So I did a little bit of that. And then I ended up working for a company doing murals, and they did really large scale lobby art. And I did a lot of, for that company, I did portraits, like boardroom portraits and that kind of thing. So it was, so that was kind of my base income in New York. So there was always something. And even before that, I worked for McGraw-Hill doing illustration for about 8 years part-time.
So you always had something on the side. Do you still have something on the side now, or are you?
No, now it's just paintings really for the last few years, I guess, or 3 years. Yeah.
How did you not how did you transition that, but I'm just always curious, like when you like, to me, having all the, and I always have like something on the side. It's kind of like my safety blanket.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a good idea. I mean, in a way, just because it is such an unsteady profession that I still would like to have something on the side, just to know it's there,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. I know sometimes it's like uncomfortable to talk about this.
Yeah.
But are you okay on time?
Oh yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. No, I wanted to switch gears and talk about your painting process itself. Like, what do you have, like, habits or rituals that you consistently do when you go into the studio every day?
Yeah. There's a couple. I'm not exactly a creature of habit, but there's a few things I always. Well, I mean, I'll pick out what I'm going to listen to or watch. That takes 3 hours. And,
Very. So
a cup of coffee.
If that takes
paper.
So we need to get the Chris playlist for
the
studio. That'd be pretty awesome.
That's kind of funny, actually. Yeah. So once that's set up, I don't know if I have a lot of habits. I mean, I work on maybe 3 to 5 paintings, or started at any one time. And I have one thing I do that this is kind of a studio setup thing, and I've done it probably since the mid 2000s when so in 2005 I moved into this studio, and also in the Mission District. It was a brand new studio. It was really big, and it had big white walls and big windows. It was a beautiful studio, and in the way I set it up, I took all my paint racks and drawing racks and bookshelves and all that stuff, and I put it at one end of the studio. And because of the way the lighting came in, I set up my easel, in a particular way, but it ended up being that I faced all that stuff in the back. And so I'd work on my paintings, and for a couple of years, I hated that studio. I wanted to get away from my painting all the time. I was taking tons of coffee breaks, and I just didn't like being there. And then my wife came in, and she was looking at this and saying, like, why you have this beautiful white wall behind you? Why don't you turn your easel around and face the white wall, right? And so it meant adjusting some lighting in the windows a bit, but I did that, and from that point on, I never had a problem. And I think, and so now, like when I'm in a new studio, I always have like a blank white wall behind my easel. So I just don't have anything to distract me back there.
Yeah.
But I think also because I work from very minimal reference, and a lot of it's from my imagination and, kind of constructed logically and that kind of thing. So, if there's stuff distracting back there, I think it's just too much for my mind to deal with or something while I'm trying to figure things out in my head.
Yeah.
So the blank wall has, been like totally saved my working habit, I guess, or process.
It makes sense though, because I don't know about you, but like if there's a lot of stuff around, to me it means I need to do something with that. So in the back of my head, there's like a list building of things that need to be done.
Things that need to be cleaned and organized.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous, but yeah, I totally get the blank wall.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing I do is I always keep my palette in kind of the same sort of a spectral setup. So I have the grays, and then I have the earth tones, and then, all the way through yellow, reds, blah, 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 blue, green. So it's almost like always painting like with a kind of like piano keys, you always know where everything is.
Can you send me a picture of your palette?
I could, yeah.
I love that. Sorry, I'm such a geek. I love that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, the rest of it, I don't know if there's any other studio habits I have that are really very interesting. So I have a cat that comes and sits on my lap all the time, so I pick out cat hairs, but that's about it.
You got a little set of tweezers right there.
Yeah. No, I do, really.
Oh, that's so funny. So, last question. What are you working on right now? What are you currently obsessed with?
Yeah, so I just finished a show at Vine Art Gallery in Melbourne, and so that was a number of paintings. I had I don't know, maybe it was a lot of shows last year. So I'm kind of taking a break right now, but I have a couple shows coming up where I'm going to do some kind of strange portraits. One's going to be kind of a nocturne, and then the others I'm actually going to take some references of friends, but just use sort of their mouth and nose region, and then kind of build the face off of that. I have this kind of vague idea in my head that it's going to be, sort of darker backgrounds and very textured backgrounds. I'm kind of into playing with patterns, symbols, that sort of thing. So, but very subtly in the backgrounds, I want it to be almost look like almost like hieroglyphics or something. But so you see it from a distance, it just looks like texture, but you get up close and there's all kinds of things going on. I like to play with that small world, big world sort of thing going on. So,
by the way, what size are your paintings? How big do you work?
They tend to be on the smaller side. So 12 by 12 inches is pretty standard. Maybe in the medium size, like 20 by 20, that kind of range. And then there's some bigger ones that are maybe 5 or 6 feet. But, it's funny because in New York, I worked on really, the company I worked for, we'd get a little 8 by 10 printout and have like 3 or 4 days to paint like something like 30 feet, acrylic, it was crazy stuff. But, I've worked in all ranges of sizes, but just for practicality, and shipping, all those sort of things, it's I tend to not go over about 3 or 4 feet.
Right.
I'd love to do bigger pieces though, but
later. Very cool. I know I said that was the last question, but I just feel like asking you one more. Do you mind?
Oh, sure.
Okay. What advice would you give to yourself, the artist that you were, say, 10 years ago?
I would say, first I would say is get your Facebook art page and Instagram account sooner.
Has that been a big influence on your work? Or, not your work, but on your on getting yourself out there?
It did help, I have to say, more with Facebook, I think. But I think it helps a lot of artists now. So I wish I'd got it sooner, but it's I know some galleries found me that way. So yeah. I would also say I probably would have told myself to move to New York sooner, or LA or something like that. Yeah.
What did that specifically do for you?
Well, when I moved to New York, just to give you an example, I probably in the first 2 weeks of being in New York, I probably am a more serious artist in that 2 weeks than 10 years in San Francisco. And every time you'd meet up with your artist friends, they're working on something, they're they got a show going. You are kind of forced to keep up and forced to create things. And it's so busy in New York. That you just don't have any time for self-doubt. And so for me, coming there, I had work, the work I'm doing now, actually, that was kind of on the side. It was in my sketchbooks. I had some paintings like that started in San Francisco, but I never showed them because there everybody wanted my still lifes or my portraits. So when I came to New York, I was kind of a new person. And I knew at least everybody's trying, there's so many artists, everybody's trying to stand out and be different. And I knew at least what was me, was what was in the sketchbooks, what was these paintings. So that's what I started to present. And, it really, New York just kind of forces you, I think any place where you have a lot of artists, it forces you to kind of bring your best game to
Yeah, there's that saying that you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most. And so if you're surrounding yourself with artists who are very, very serious about their work and who are showing and who are kind of like on this certain trajectory, then it's going to pull you along with them.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, it's, and you're going to bounce ideas off each other. And you're going to get really good feedback. And, and the artists there are very committed to doing good work, they're very ambitious. And, it's not just about, going on a bike ride in Marin and, surfing and then we're going to go talk about art. No, it's art all the time. They're fully involved in it. So, and it rubs off.
Yeah, totally. And also, I found that too, that when you move to a new place, you do have that ability to, reinvent yourself if you want to, or at least just like shut off expectations and do things differently without feeling, I don't know. It's a weird thing to say like that would act. It feels like odd that things that would hold you back and that moving somewhere else lets you kind of shed these things. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I think before I came to New York, I had sort of, I don't know, you get these preconceived notions of what art is, like that there's, whether it be like, postmodern definitions of art or modernist or traditional painting definitions of art. There's kind of this high art that's kind of held up. And, working there, working for other artists and you really see like it's production and it's getting it out there. And no matter how you do it, you just get it out there. And I sort of found actually after the first year that I really didn't like art. I didn't like some of the snobbery involved in it. And I didn't, this whole kind of pretension around what art is and in quotes, and I think after the first year I was there, I actually didn't want to be an artist anymore. I started to think about maybe what else I could do, change careers or something. Mainly because I didn't want to be involved in trying to get into this art or make my work art, and I started, again, thinking about something else. And I just realized I just wanted to make stuff and I wanted to get it seen, but I didn't care at that point where it was seen. If it was in a cafe, if it was in an alleyway, it didn't really matter. And I think at that point, once I kind of came to that point where I decided I really didn't want to be an artist anymore. I mean, I think that's when things kind of changed and, all the rules were gone. And then I sort of became an artist because in a way that's what an artist is, right? You're not abiding by all the rules, right? And not to say my work is outside the rules. Obviously it's within, the techniques and so on, but I felt freed up, I guess. Not being concerned questioning whether it was art or not and all that kind of stuff.
If you could own a piece of art by any living artist, what would it be or whose?
A living artist. Well, I already own my wife's paintings, so that's probably out. I guess I would say Neo Rauch, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but I actually have no idea where I'd hang them. They're really large works. He's a German artist, and I don't know if you've seen his paintings, but
I haven't. So can you I'm not familiar with his work at all. Can you describe it a little?
Yeah, he uses a lot of characters that kind of reminiscent of Cold War. It's actually a lot of a different type of imagery, kind of sometimes sort of organic imagery mixed with sort of familiar looking, but they're a little bit cartooned. I guess the best thing is just to look him up and see his work. But his color palette's really beautiful and strong, and it's very surreal, very narrative pieces. There's kind of an arbitrary, seemingly arbitrary perspective and kind of a hierarchy of the different characters that's played with. So you have sometimes very large figures and small figures mixed together. And
you said he does really large pieces? Yeah,
a lot of them are very large. I saw his show at David Swerner Gallery when I was in New York some years back, and the pieces are probably, 20 feet.
Wow, that's huge.
They're big. Yeah, they're big. I guess what I like about it is the narrative quality of it, that you have this kind of big world, small world. That's almost kind of what Bruegel does, where there seems to be sort of a narrative you get a sense of. You're never quite sure what it fully is. So there's kind of these, like the bigger plot and then subplots, but it's left kind of nebulous. So you can kind of make your own conclusions about it. And I like that about a work. I think if you're painting a narrative painter, you can fall in the trap of kind of doing a one punchline sort of piece. So it's all wrapped up and you see it, you get the punchline, you walk away. But I think if it's left kind of open, you can keep coming back to the piece. The viewer can keep coming back and finding new interpretations and more to look at and more to feast their mind on, I guess.
Yeah, and kind of fill in the blanks, that little bit of mystery, I think, is what makes art intriguing instead of spelling everything out.
Yeah, it's sort of the lost and found, the atmosphere, but within the storytelling aspect of it.
Right.
It gives it that mystery, keeps you coming back to it.
Very cool. I'll definitely check out his work, and I'll link to it in the show notes because, like I said, the reason that I asked that question is because most of the time I hear about artists that I'm not familiar with.
Right.
So I get to broaden my own horizons, and and I think it's really helpful to see art that you don't normally get to see.
Yeah, cool.
Well, Chris, thank you so much again for being on the show and taking the time to talk with me and sharing all your insights. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It was a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast link to see show notes and examples of Chris's work. Chris has shows coming up in Australia, Las Vegas, and Munich, Germany. You'll find links to exactly when and where in the show notes. And I just want to note that I have started a Facebook group for Savvy Painter listeners. You have been amazing at sending me emails, asking questions, and commenting on what you like and you don't like. And I just wanted to open it up and get it all in one place to make things a little bit more immediate. So I would love for you to join, and you can find the link to join on the sidebar of the show notes as well. And before we say goodbye, I want to give a quick shout out and a thank you to Abby McGray, Winslow Art Center, Carolyn Green, Curious Catfish, Gaela Irwin, Karen O'Connell, Kathy Nouse, Alchemy Works, Jeanette Gray, Denise Klitzy, Patricia Matranga, Deb Cook-Shapiro, Barbara Chantre, Christine Rasmussen, Leslie Wilson, Agnes Caldwell, Arun Littlejohn, Jeong Kim Studio, and Greg Decker. Thank you all so much for the support of this podcast. Until next week, yes, I did say next week, we are now going back to weekly episodes. This is Ann Trees Wood with the Savvy Painter podcast, and thank you so much for listening.